Controversy in the nation's capital. Ahead on Face the State today, as more presidential executive orders are being held up in court, we'll sit down with a constitutional law expert to weigh in on these crucial cases and how they could play out in the months ahead. Plus, Elon Musk threatening to shut down federal grants to Lutheran social services, including right here in Central Ohio. He's calling the grants illegal payments, but our local nonprofits say otherwise.
Those dollars help us to provide our food assistance programs. They help us to provide our domestic violence programs, our homeless shelter, and help us connect people to affordable housing.
Coming up on Face the State, the uncertain future for these groups and how it could affect their ability to function. And President Donald Trump continuing to deny any connection to Project 2025. We're taking a deep dive into the Republican playbook. Also, Ohio facing a childcare affordability crisis.
Why do we have to make such huge sacrifices for something like childcare?
The possible relief some parents could soon see and why some families say it's not enough. Face the State starts right now. Right now, unprecedented action from the Oval Office is causing reaction from Americans. In Ohio and across the U.S., thousands of people are taking to the streets and their state capitals, protesting a wide range of policies rolling out from the Trump administration. And policies they argue are an overreach from the president. But are they? Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Angela Ann, sitting in for Doug Petcash today. Well, let's take a look at some of the actions the president has taken so far that are raising some legal concerns. Right now, the president is preparing to gut the U.S. Education Department, proposing a U.S. takeover of the Gaza Strip, and ordering the FBI to turn over a complete list of agents who investigated the January 6th riots and his classified documents case. The Trump administration is also offering every CIA worker a buyout to resign. Now, President Trump is also backing Elon Musk's actions in leading the new Department of Government Efficiency. And already, Musk has gained access to the U.S. Treasury and Environmental Protection Agency. Musk and Trump also began shutting down the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. And the legal battle over Trump's attempts to end automatic birthright citizenship is now in the courts. That brings us today to our expert on constitutional law. Ruth Kolker has published more than 50 articles in law journals, and she's had her work cited twice by the United States Supreme Court. So Ohio State University professor Ruth Kolker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That was a lot to get through, but let's first start with this. The claims that President Trump is overstepping his executive power. What are the concerns to you? And do you think that there is actually a case here to be made?
Oh, there's definitely a case to be made that he's stepping over his authority, and I would say it's probably deliberate on his part. I mean, just to take the birthright citizenship example, we've already had several courts conclude that that executive order was unconstitutional. Those judges range the spectrum from having been appointed by Republican presidents or Democratic presidents. Their opinions have been extremely strong because there's just no plausible argument that he can ban birthright citizenship. And so, why did he do it? I assume he did it for political reasons and knowing that the courts would strike it down. In his first term as president, he had many of his actions struck down by the courts. And I think we'll see the same thing this time around. We already have. There's something like 7 courts have already struck down conduct of his administration.
Already, within the first couple of weeks,
Yeah, that's unprecedented.
Well, as we said, Trump is already in a legal battle, like you said, over the birthright citizenship. So where does that one specifically stand now? Because there's so many people out there feeling like they're in limbo and not knowing the legalities of this.
Well, so there is a national injunction in place that will not permit that executive order to go into effect. I think it was the end of February or so that it's supposed to go into effect. And the reason the courts have been so quick to strike down that executive order is the Constitution says specifically that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So if you're a conservative member of the court who really believes that we should emphasize the textual meaning of the document, there's text. And so that's why we're seeing both judges who swing more liberal or swing more conservative just saying, read the text. You can't do this. You could try to amend the Constitution, but that's, of course, a very difficult step, and that's not going to happen.
And lengthy, too. So for people out there who are feeling a little uneasy, perhaps just wait it out, let this all play out. And
yeah, well, at this point, it's not in effect. I would be shocked.
Yeah.
I really would be shocked if it ever went into effect.
All right, let's talk about the buyout. You know, when you hear about a buyout in a typical world, you're thinking, okay, great, I'm going to get some money. I'm going to, you know, go retire, do something fun. But the buyout for federal workers, a judge has also temporarily blocked that, pushing that deadline a little bit for these workers to accept it or not. Does the Constitution, Ruth, actually grant the president the ability to do these mass buyouts?
Well, that mass buyout actually didn't occur through an executive order. That came from a directive from the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, an agency. And they did that by sending out an email to nearly all federal workers telling them that they could take this buyout. So there has been a lawsuit filed. We have so many lawsuits, hard to keep track of them. And you mentioned that a judge has temporarily said you can't do this minute. He hasn't said you can't do it ever. I mean, it's just on hold.
Right.
And the lawsuit that's been brought has been brought by unions that represent federal workers. And one of the very basic arguments that they're making is that this email from OPM doesn't comply with the contracts that unions have, unionized workers have with the federal government. That's just one of many arguments that are made. This is something that's being decided under what's called the Administrative Procedures Act, and I don't even teach that statute, although it's hard not to know something about it. So that's a different problem. I think it's actually more complicated than like birthright citizenship. The other thing President Trump has done through an executive order, which hasn't gotten as much press, is he moved a lot of federal workers to what he calls Schedule F. That's a new schedule that they invented during his first administration. It never went into effect because Biden eliminated it when he was elected. But it's a new category for people he considers politically affiliated, which is different than politically appointed. And he's trying to move a lot of civil service workers to Schedule F. That also will likely be challenged in court because it's not clear that the president has the authority to just create these new rules about civil service employees who have statutory protections that Congress has created.
He's trying to create new categories, in other words, what you're saying, to perhaps fit whatever agenda that he wants, but it's not fitting with the legal statute.
That's right, because Congress is the one that creates the civil service. And so the president is not allowed to act contrary to a congressional statute. And it appears that the Schedule F decision on his part is something that could happen if Congress wanted to, but Congress hasn't taken those steps.
Let's talk about DOGE, because that certainly is making a lot of headlines right now. And a lot of people are even saying, you know, the Constitution grants Congress the power to establish new federal government offices and departments, but this was created without Congress. So is it even legit?
Well, the president is allowed to hire people to be advisors to him. You know, he has a chief of staff, and the chief of staff doesn't have to be approved by Congress. So there are things the president can do to have advisors around him. But DOGE goes well beyond that because, as you know, the employees of DOGE are now going to Treasury, going to Labor, as you said, I think, in your opening, and looking at documents. And so that's a significant problem because there's no statute that directs or contemplates that conduct. What they've done is they've made those people temporary employees of those departments so that they can have some legal cover for them doing some of this work. But there's also been a lawsuit filed against that step. And again, it's been the labor unions that have filed that lawsuit, saying that the way DOGE has been accessing information violates various privacy laws that have been enacted in recent years. The most recent is a 2014 statute called the Federal Information Security Modernization Act that has to do with the important need for security for all the stuff on the internet, on the web. We're all very worried about that these days, right? And so it appears that they're not following the security protocols that Congress requires. So again, butting up against what Congress has said,
Sure.
the president can't override Congress.
All right, we have about a minute left. I want to end with this one question because this really affects our foreign relations with partners around the world. The president wanting to gut USAID. I know that it was mandated in 1961 to establish this agency with foreign assistance. So can he just say, nope, sorry, we're out, we're done?
So there was a second statute passed in 1998 that requires that agency to exist. And so you'll notice they're keeping, 170 employees. And so is that the same as having gotten rid of the agency? And again, that will be challenged in court. We'll have to see. But there's, again, a statute. And the president isn't allowed to disregard federal statutes.
And a process, too.
In a process, and that's part of the problem, and the same with the civil service. That's part of the problem, that there's a process.
Well, I think we're going to keep you on retainer, Ruth, because certainly there is a lot to get through with just what we've seen so far in the first weeks of the new administration and what's to come, which is anyone's game at this point.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime you need me.
We appreciate your time. Thank you so much. You just heard Ruth talk about Elon Musk and Doge. And right now, the world's richest man is saying that he will use his department to shut down what he's calling, quote, illegal payments to several nonprofits connected to the Lutheran faith. That includes Lutheran Social Services of Central Ohio. They oversee more than half a dozen programs for countless communities. 10 TV's Carla Rogner took this concern to the nonprofit's CEO.
Lutheran Social Services has not received any communication that they'll actually lose funding, just the threat in Musk's post.
So I've been coming to the health center for about 4 or 5 months now.
When Tashana Davis unexpectedly became homeless last year, she sought shelter at Lutheran Social Services.
So when I first got here, I couldn't see, so I take vision.
They were able to fix her vision at the Low Barrier Health Center
I can see now.
and help her get a job at Lowe's. Now she's moving out soon into an apartment.
I am grateful that LSS was here.
It's patients like her that CEO Rachel Lustig worries about if LSS would lose federal funding.
It's personal because it's about people that we know getting the care and support that they need.
On Sunday, President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, shared a post on X accusing several Lutheran organizations of money laundering, including Lutheran Social Services of Central Ohio. Elon Musk shared the post saying the Doge team is rapidly shutting down these illegal payments.
Lutheran Social Services receives 70% of our grant funding from the federal government. That represents almost $16 million in our community. Those dollars help us to provide our food assistance programs. They help us to provide our domestic violence programs, our homeless shelter, and help us connect people to affordable housing.
As head of the Department of Government Efficiency, Musk is tasked with slashing federal funding. He has said he could trim $1 trillion from the federal deficit by addressing waste, fraud, and abuse. With Musk's access to the U.S. Treasury payment system, leaders at LSS are left with questions about the future.
Would you be able to function if you lost federal funding?
We would continue to do what we can to advance our mission to care for people in need. But our capacity to be able to do that would be severely impacted if we did not have these grants.
For now, Lutheran Social Services of Central Ohio will continue to operate as normal. Reporting in Columbus, Carla Rogner, 10 TV News.
Carla, thank you. Meanwhile, a lot of the actions taken so far by the Trump administration appear to be out of Project 2025. It is something President Trump has denied having any connection to while he was campaigning, but Democrats still sounded the alarm, warning that a second Trump term would bring changes from the immigration crackdown to dismantling DEI. Reporter Tom Foreman examines how those warnings are playing out today.
Reforming or doing away with the federal disaster relief agency, FEMA, dismantling diversity programs, rolling back environmental restrictions, accepting only 2 genders, replacing nonpartisan federal workers with administration loyalists, and aggressively pursuing undocumented immigrants. All of those ideas are being pushed by President Donald Trump.
We're getting rid of all of the cancer. I call it cancer, the cancer caused by the Biden administration.
And a CNN analysis has found many of Trump's plans reflect deep ties to Project 2025. the 900-page plan of action put out by the Conservative Heritage Foundation.
Look, I think the data speaks for itself. There is a clear overlap between what Donald Trump is doing so far and what Project 2025 has proposed.
During the campaign, Trump repeatedly denied any links to the project.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
And yet, of the 53 executive actions in his first week in office, CNN's analysis found more than 2/3 align with the project's proposals. At least 140 Trump administration officials and dozens of allies helped craft that document, including his new CIA director, chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, and Tom Homan, the border czar.
We're going to go where we got to go, whether it's a school, a church, or a hospital.
More specifics. When the South American country of Colombia initially refused to accept military planes loaded with deportees, Trump quickly and aggressively threatened to impose a punishing tariff, right on script with what Project 2025 proposed.
As you know, in Colombia, they agreed with us almost immediately after I got involved.
Trump immediately revoked the security clearance of top government officials suspected of not supporting his goals. And he's talked up more oil drilling in the far north, where the Project 2025 plan says Alaska is a special case and deserves immediate action. For all that, a Trump spokesman still insists the new president had nothing to do with Project 2025, and he's just securing the border, restoring common sense, driving down inflation, and unleashing American energy.
That was Tom Foreman reporting. Well, Governor Mike DeWine putting forward his proposed budget for Ohio. In just 2 minutes, how many millions he wants to help families fight rising costs, and which taxes the governor wants to hike up to help pay for it. Plus, the controversial new transgender bathroom law is facing its first challenge before even taking effect. Ahead, why one school district is questioning how it can comply to the new law. Welcome back to Face the State. Providing extra support to Ohio children while they're in school. That's what Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says he wants to do with his newly proposed state budget. Inside that proposal, he is pushing for lawmakers to back a program for students to get the eye care they need and driver's education classes. The budget also guarantees admission to any Ohio college or university for students in the top 5% of their class. It also provides a $5,000 yearly scholarship. Now, the governor is also proposing a new child tax credit to help families with rising costs. But some families say the size of that credit is not nearly enough. 10 TV's Bryn Caswell spoke to parents about if this proposal will actually make a difference.
Half of Ohio parents have said they've had to cut back on their work hours in order to offset high childcare costs. Some tell me this proposed childcare tax may help, but some are worried it's just not enough. Governor Mike DeWine has asked lawmakers to approve a yearly child tax credit in his latest budget proposal. It would give families up to $1,000 a year with children 6 and below.
This will be paid by an increase in the cigarette tax of about $1.50.
Mom of 2, Haley Rogers, feels it won't help. She left her career to offset high child care costs.
$1,000 isn't really enough to have me go right back working in my career that I love. $1,000 a month? Okay, now we're talking. But you know, $1,000 a year, that doesn't even cover 2 weeks of childcare.
Daycare owner and mom, Christy Thompson, is upset her youngest child won't qualify for the tax credit. Her youngest is 8.
It would help me put food on the table and pay my bills. I mean, that's exactly where all that money goes.
According to budget documents, the child tax credit would be refundable, and some portion would be available to parents with a joint income of $94,000 or less. Rogers thinks middle-class families will continue to be forgotten.
Just because we're above that line doesn't mean we don't need help. Between rent prices, student loans, everyday living expenses, add on top of it, childcare, there is no help for us. We don't qualify for anything.
And that was Bryn Caswell reporting. Meanwhile, you just heard Governor DeWine say that he does plan to pay for this with a proposed cigarette tax increase. So here's what that would mean. The tax on a pack of 20 cigarettes will nearly double from $1.60 to $3.10 a pack. Most other tobacco products would be taxed at 42% of the wholesale price, which is up from the current 17%. The governor says this move will help prevent nearly 12,000 kids from becoming smokers. And right now, Ohio has the 29th highest cigarette tax rate in the country. DeWine also proposing to raise taxes on sports betting to help pay for new stadiums. And he says he wants to double the sports gaming tax from 20% to 40%. DeWine says this would bring in an additional $130 to $180 million a year. That money will go into a fund for professional sports facilities and also youth sports education. Well, just weeks before Ohio's new transgender bathroom law goes into effect, one public school is now considering whether or not to comply. Up next on Face the State, the options they're weighing as the Ohio Attorney General is now threatening legal action. In just 16 days, Ohio's controversial bathroom law is going into effect. This new law requires students at all schools and colleges to use a bathroom that aligns with the gender they were assigned at birth. However, this law does not include an enforcement mechanism, and that's something that the state's largest public school district is considering to take advantage of. 10 TV's Colin Dorsey was at last week's Columbus School Board meeting as that district is now debating whether or not to comply with the new law.
I sit here as a member of this board who has given so much to this community and our kids to fight.
A challenging decision on what to do for some board members about this policy, which, as it's written right now, goes against the state's so-called bathroom bill. That law requires students to use bathrooms based on their biological sex at birth. The board had been considering two options: rewriting the policy in accordance with state law or scrap it altogether. Then tonight, a third option.
I'd like to keep it the way it is.
Doing that would be against the law, and district legal counsel says could open the school up to a legal fight. It's something I pressed board president Michael Cole about after tonight's meeting.
A lot of discussion tonight. Does that mean the board could possibly be willing to stand in the face of state law?
Well, at this point, that opportunity was tabled.
If we're not going to stand up and do what's right, I'm not really sure what we're here for.
Parent Carrie Kinzerski is in favor of keeping the policy as is or getting it off the books to support students it affects.
The amount of injustice that trans people have to experience already and that they're going to have to experience with the other laws once they go into effect is tragic.
The current CCS policy allows transgender students to use a bathroom corresponding with their gender identity. Last year, the conservative group Parents Defending Education took issue with the district's policy, calling it vague in regards to parental rights with students identifying as transgender. With the discussion tabled, the clock is ticking, and the question still stands of what is the board going to do?
One lawsuit can be millions and millions and millions of dollars in a district where millions of dollars are whether or not you can feed children and keep the heat on.
And that was Colin Dorsey reporting. Now, Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost says he is ready to take legal action against Columbus City schools if they do not comply with the law. And meantime, the board indicated that it could call a special session to talk about this matter further before voting at the next meeting, which is just 1 week before that bathroom bill would take effect. Well, thank you for joining me for Face the State this week. I'm Angela Ann. We'll see you next Sunday at 11:30.